So now the fun part. So we've identified the risk factors. We've come up with our focus crash types, facility types, and risk factors, so we understand what's leading to these crashes. We've gone through a more detailed assessment to figure out, are these risk factors actually risk factors? And now we've found what sites have these risk factors present. So we've screened our network. And that's not to say we're going to put the same treatment at all of these locations. So maybe rumble strips would be an appropriate treatment to address runoff road crashes on curves or tangents. But maybe rumble strips aren't appropriate everywhere, especially in noise-sensitive areas. So we have to come up with appropriate countermeasures for each location. So it's not get to your list of sites, pick a countermeasure, and install it everywhere. It's get to your list of sites, select a list of potential countermeasures, and then figure out which ones are most appropriate for each category or group of locations. So again, this is a 3-task step. Task 1, we're just coming up with ideas. What are potential countermeasures to address our focus crash type and the associated risk factors? Once we have that comprehensive list, can we put together some type of decision tree that really guides us to the appropriate countermeasure for each location? And then the third step is to implement that decision process and assign a countermeasure for each location. So there's a number of good resources to help you along the way with identifying specific countermeasures. FHWA's Proven Safety Countermeasures is a good place to start. So the website is here at the bottom of the screen. But for each of these proven safety countermeasures, if you clicked on the hyperlink, you're going to see something like this. So this one relates to roadside improvements at curves. Each summary has a basic description of what that countermeasure is. It provides a graphic to explain how it's intended to be used or give you a little bit more information on what it means, what this specific countermeasure actually is. There's some national statistics. So in this case, 27% of all fatal crashes occur at curves. 80% of fatal crashes at curves are roadway departure crashes. So just a little bit of supporting information. And then it goes through specific pieces within that countermeasure. So in this case, it's talking about a number of issues related to the clear zone, slope flattening, widening the shoulders. So those are all potential countermeasures related to roadside design improvements at curves. Our countermeasures don't just have to focus on engineering. We can also think about the education and the enforcement piece, especially if our focus crash type relates to speed, alcohol, seatbelt use, and so on. There's a number of resources there as well, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. Good places to start for engineering countermeasures are FHWA's Proven Safety Countermeasure website that we just showed, and also that NCHRP 500 series report that we talked about earlier. So in addition to the issues, it talks about strategies. If you're looking for behavioral countermeasures, NHTSA has the countermeasures that work. So NHTSA is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They focus on behavior. So that's an online publication, free of charge. It describes the countermeasure. It also describes the relative cost and effectiveness of those countermeasures. And there's some examples of that as well. But as always, experience and judgment is critical to countermeasure selection. It doesn't do a lot of good to select countermeasures that your agency is completely against or that may not work for one reason or another. So raised pavement markers don't always work well in the north because the snowplows kick them up. So you have to think of other options. Maybe they're recessed pavement markers, or maybe it's a different countermeasure altogether. But that judgment and experience is critical. The next few slides I'll just go through quickly. If anybody has any comments or experiences they want to share related to these, please do. But note the commonality. They're all very or relatively low cost. So when we're thinking about roadway departure countermeasures, putting chevrons on curves, maybe installing larger or brighter signs, delineating barriers, extending the edge lines through curves, all very low cost. With intersections, we talked about sight distance being a key risk factor. So just going through and making sure you're maintaining the vegetation within the sight triangles. It's a maintenance issue, and it can be a little bit of a burden on the maintenance crews, but relatively low cost, something you can do with internal forces, and something that can really help to save lives. Supplemental signing, so installing advanced warning signs, maybe advanced pavement markings, also keys for intersection safety. There's a whole host of pedestrian countermeasures, and these depend on whether your issues are at intersections or mid-block. If they're at intersections, are the intersections signalized or stop controlled? And that's going to help guide you to the appropriate countermeasures. But there's a whole host of those on the website as well. And there's also some publications from Federal Highway and others that list a number of intersection resources that focus on intersections in general and also get into pedestrians. The Highway Safety Research Center, and Dan has helped out with this, but they have the Ped Bike Information Clearinghouse, so that's a great resource if you're interested in ped bike resources. You can go in there and look at issues, countermeasures, and so on. I mentioned we had some examples from NHTSA's countermeasures that work. This is an example from their publication, and this is related to sobriety checkpoints. You may have to call them safety checkpoints and do more than a sobriety check, depending on your state laws. But they've been shown to reduce crashes 10 to 15%, and alcohol-related crashes even more. So that's kind of where the effectiveness rating comes in. NHTSA also gives the relative cost, how much they're used across the country, and what the time frame is for implementation.
I'm surprised at the cost, Frank. I would think that'd be cheap, but...
Yeah, I guess any thoughts or comments on the cost of a sobriety checkpoint? I know you might have to pay for overtime. You may have to provide some additional equipment. So was it in Iowa, Jerry, where they actually funded a van?
Yeah, so they actually, I think some of these costs get into some national media campaigns going along with it, so that might be some of the cost things here. In Iowa, the Governor's Highway Safety Office, I think in conjunction with the Iowa DOT, built a trailer that they can actually provide for these kind of checkpoints. It's been great for them to get their law enforcement agencies together, and so the state patrol participates, but then even the county officers, even some of the smaller two-person or two-officer shops can also be part of a bigger effort, and so they participate as well. So the bottom picture is one of their shots, I think, too. But this trailer has all the proper warning signs. It's got cones to help pull people over. It's got traffic control layouts for them. It's even got coolers and fans and for things so that, if it's a hot day, they've got all that stuff right there. So it's been good. They actually keep it down at their Des Moines shop, kind of in the central part of the state. Any of the law enforcement agencies can check it out and borrow it for certain weekends or whatever, so they keep a calendar for it. I think they're even going to build a second one. So it started under their SHSP effort. This was something as they were looking at enforcement, hey, would this be helpful? And they thought it would be a great thing. So I think it was Marshall County Sheriff's Office was the one that came up with the idea, hey, what if we had all this stuff in one spot instead of having to try and call out the DOT maintenance people to borrow stuff. So it's been really cool. I can get more information on Nicole Fox from Iowa DOT probably.
Jerry, what's included in the trailer?
Like I said, it's got warning signs, it's got cones, they've got things like coolers, anything they might need to do the sobriety checkpoint or the safety checkpoint, they try to keep in that trailer so that it's got brand new things, and so they can do it the proper way and do it in a safe environment. They used to have issues where maintenance would help them with the signs if they weren't called out or busy with something else. They would use cones if they could find them, those kind of things. And so having it all in one contained spot, ready to use, they've got even directions, kind of instructions on how to set it up, so the layouts and whatnot. So it's really cool, but the Governor's Highway Safety Office, or the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau is the one that really put it together. So.
Any idea how long these crash reductions last? We talked yesterday in session on culture, talked about the fact that it might be a short term problem, how long term.
Yeah, good question. So related to the duration of the effectiveness, is this a short-lived effect or a long-lived effect? I think if you used media effectively to say we're going to be doing this and this is something we're going to continue, and had it reoccurring and not necessarily on a regular basis but on a random-ish basis so people couldn't figure out the pattern, I think it would maintain its effectiveness. But yeah, it would take that continued effort and not just a one-time shot. But going back to Brian's original point, I am surprised to see that as well with the cost, because it seems like a lot of this could be done relatively low cost, and maybe compared to engineering costs, it may be very low cost, but compared to other behavioral measures, maybe it rises to the top a little. But, any other questions, comments? All right. This is just another example in there for their high visibility seatbelt checks, and they saw a 16% reduction, or 16% increase in seatbelt use. But this was in conjunction with a media campaign. So that gets us to the next part. So we're thinking about effectiveness, we're thinking about costs. We can come up with all kinds of countermeasures, but really we should be installing those countermeasures that are giving us the best return on investment. So we do that through documented effectiveness, whether that's through a national publication or something you've done through your own agency's data. And the more you can do that, the better you can refine your own results. Maybe your results differ from the national estimates. You may have different implementation and maintenance costs as well. But start thinking about the effectiveness of each countermeasure versus its cost, and then again, the consistency with your agency's policies and practices. So how many folks are familiar with crash modification factors? Have you heard of the term? All right, many of you. Good. A crash modification factor is a number that tells you what is the effectiveness of a treatment. So if I install these chevrons, do I get a 10% reduction, a 20% reduction, a 30% reduction? That CMF is just a number that tells you the effectiveness. So a couple of points, if you are looking for CMFs and you start to use these, there's a couple of key points to use them appropriately. One, you have to make sure the CMF applies to your situation. So was this developed for urban signalized intersections and you're trying to apply it in a rural area, that may not be the most appropriate use. If that's the only value you can find, it might be the best you can do. But a lot of times there's multiple CMFs available. Don't just pick the one that gives you the best result. Pick the one that's most appropriate for your situation. CMFs also apply to specific crash types and severities. So it may be for total crashes. It may apply to left turn crashes at signalized intersections or fatal and injury left turn crashes. So whatever crash type and severity it applies to, apply that CMF to those crashes. Don't take one for total crashes and apply it to rear end crashes or vice versa. So those are kind of the few key points related to the application of CMFs. Federal Highway maintains a CMF clearinghouse. So that's a website free of charge online. And there's over 5, I think maybe even 6,000 CMFs in there now from various studies across the country. Those come from either statewide research efforts, national research efforts, and other analyses. But a quick example of how we would apply a CMF, we start out with the existing crashes at our location. We're looking at those crashes and we said, all right, we wanted to treat left turn crashes here. And this is more of a site-specific example, but maybe extrapolate this to a systemic example. Let's say we wanted to address left turn crashes. The current signal phasing was permissive. So we said, all right, we want to convert this from permissive to protected permissive. So we have to go into the clearinghouse, type in either signal phasing or permissive or permitted. You could do different combinations to try and find CMFs that might apply. And then, like I said, each CMF has some specific characteristics associated with it. So this specific CMF is 0.86. So that represents a 14% reduction. So basically 1 minus that gives you the percent reduction. So a 14% reduction in left turn crashes, and those are all left turn crashes, not specific severities. So 14% reduction in all left turn crashes at urban 4-legged intersections. And obviously these have to be signalized if you're changing the signal phasing. But those are the specific characteristics to which the CMF would apply. The other thing that's given here is a star quality rating. So this is much different than that risk assessment where we were looking at stars earlier. But this is showing how much confidence do we have in that 14% reduction. So part of that is how good was the study design? Was it a very simple before-after study, or was it more rigorous where they were trying to account for other factors? how much data did they have? Was this based on 1 or 2 sites, or was this based on 100 locations in multiple states? So now we're getting a better and better estimate. And there's several other factors that are included in this, but basically it says how much confidence we can have in the results at a quick glance. All right, so we've identified our countermeasure, we have our CMF. We need to figure out which of our crashes are the applicable crashes. So we had all of our crashes, and now this CMF applies to left turn crashes. You probably can't see those circles very well, but there's only a few left turn crashes at this intersection. So we can only apply that CMF, that 14% reduction, to the left turn crashes. So to figure out how many crashes we would have with the treatment, we multiply the CMF by our crashes without the treatment. So if we had 2 crashes without, we have a 14% reduction in that, then we could estimate what the change in crashes would be on an annual basis. So that's quick and dirty how CMFs are selected and applied. Any questions there? There's a whole nother course on CMF application if you're interested. But any questions or comments on CMFs? All right. So we have our whole list of countermeasures. We're starting to think about the costs and benefits, and we want to select those that are the most cost-effective and also are very targeted. So we're trying to target those underlying factors. It doesn't do us a lot of good to install high-friction surface treatment on curves if the issue, the underlying factor, is run-off-the-road crashes at night on curves during dry conditions. So high-friction surface treatment is very applicable to curves, but if the underlying factor is wet crash locations. You want to provide this range of options for flexibility. So if you told everybody rumble strips is going to be most appropriate, some folks may say, well, we can't use rumble strips in our area because it's a little bit more densely populated, it's not going to work. So they throw their hands up and walk away. We don't want that to happen, so we need to have some other options for them. So get your stakeholders involved early. So if you give them a list of countermeasures and ask them to implement, that's probably too late to engage the stakeholders. You want them to have some input throughout so they get buy-in. They can tell you very early on that, yes, these countermeasures could possibly work, or no, they're not going to work because of X, Y, or Z, and we can move on and adjust accordingly. If anything doesn't fit well, just take it off the list. There's no harm in paring the list down early. Again, there's no minimum or optimal number, but more than one is appropriate. And then thinking about the costs, you can start to think about how many locations you could possibly treat. Because you have a number of priorities. You have your hotspots still. You have systemic, but systemic, you might have a systemic ped bike program, a systemic intersection program, a systemic roadway departure program. So how far do you want to go down each list and still have some benefit compared to the other areas? So start thinking about things at this point relative to each other. And then there's certainly an option of bundling low-cost improvements. To go out and install high-friction surface treatment at one location could be relatively expensive per curve, but if you bundled that with a number of curves across your county or across your agency, that may become more cost-effective. And you can also bundle improvements in terms of multiple improvements at one location. So you don't just have to do one thing. You could do signing, striping, and high-friction surface treatment if you think that's appropriate.